uh, Gillian Rose has suggested to us that in order to understand visual culture, we should be able to interpret the visuals. In other words, the word that she uses for a visual is an image, right? And in order to interpret an image, we need to have we need to learn the technique, what she calls compositional interpretation. And compositional interpretation basically is a term that comes from art, right? Or that comes from art theory, through which we interpret, various steps in the formation of a particular image. And we are able to explain that image with reference to the way it has been composed, right? But we left, we left in the last class, we left our discussion in the last class on the point that it is not sufficient to just stick to compositional interpretation of an image when it comes to literary studies. Rather, in the field of, or from the field of literary studies, we need to expand our analysis to include some other elements which sound to be more literature based, or which sound to be more theory based. And those elements are semiology and discourse analysis. Now, historically speaking, I mean, within the history of theory, okay, I hope the word theory does not sound too complex to you, but if you have any questions, you can ask me later. So in the history of theory, or in the history of literary theory, theory about literature, in that history, uh, uh, always the central focus has been language, right? Therefore, whenever we engage with any particular methodology, our primary concern always remains the language, right? So we have, even the former methodologies that we have been discussing, it was the language which was the primary concern. Same is case with visual methodologies as well, right? Now it might sound a little, um, it might sound a little contradictory, right? That it is visual methodology, still why do we focus on language? I think you will get answer to this question as we discuss semiology and discourse analysis, right? Now, semiology, let's take the word semiology first, right? So semiology, generally speaking, is a science of signs, right? It is a study of signs, S-I-G-N-S, right? And the primary idea in that is that uh, the human culture, right? What we call the human culture, uh, people living together, talking to each other, negotiating, transacting businesses, uh, developing relationships, making all kind of human activity possible, making societies and communities, all that together is called human culture. Now, human culture is made up of signs. Give me a second, please. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, students. All right. So human culture is made up of signs, right? So that actually means that all the human interaction that takes place, it takes place through signs. Example of that is language, right? So we all speak language, and that makes a human culture possible. Now, the most famous, philosopher or writer who proposed this particular theory and who worked a lot on that, basically, he's the one who gave us the foundational idea about language as a science system. Uh, uh, his name is Ferdinand de Saussure. So he's the one who, in his course on general linguistics, this one, proposed the idea that all language is a sign system. Basically, the words that we speak, they are signs. And signs can be divided into two parts. One part of sign is called a signified. Sign is the signified. And the other part of a sign is called a signifier, right? So for example, if we read this statement over here, um, so if we, for example, read a statement, uh, the, the signifier is a sound or image that is attached to a signified, in this case, word baby. So, for example, if we read a statement like a young individual or young person not able to talk and walk, right? Now, this statement produces, an image in our mind. A young person or individual not able to talk and walk, right? Now, if I ask you to guess, what is this? A young person not able to talk and walk. One of the responses that you people might make is, it is the baby, right? Now, the detailed description of the word baby, that detailed description is the signified, right? So the signified is the meaning of a word, right? So the detailed description is the signified, and the word that we use in order to indicate that particular description, that one word is called a signifier, right? So the word baby is a signifier, right? On the other hand, the bigger statement, a young individual able to talk and walk, that is a signified. All right. Now, the contribution that Ferdinand de Saussure made in, through his theory of science system is this, that he argued that there is no inherent connection between a signifier and signified. All right. So, for example, the word baby, if we treat that as a signifier, the word baby as a signifier does not necessarily produce the same signified for every listener of this word. Okay, so he gives example from Italian, from English, but generally speaking, as you know, the word baby does not necessarily mean, uh, a crawling human being, right? Does not necessarily mean a crawling human being. The word baby can be used for an adult as well, right? So when one adult is, speaking in intimate terms, or in loving terms with another adult, right? So one individual can use the word baby for another adult as well, right? So that is a very clear example of the use of the signifier baby in such a manner that the signifier baby does not necessarily have any inherent meaning. So when we use the word inherent, inherent means something which is inside that word. So there is no meaning which is essential to that word, right? There is no absolute essential meaning attached to any word in the whole language. So in the Sashio's terms, we say that there is no stable connection, or there is no absolute connection, or there is no inherent connection between a signifier and a signified. So we also say, for example, that the chair is not in the word chair, right? Or the baby is not in the word baby. Okay. In other words, that means that there is no absolute chair which you can imagine when you listen to the word chair. There are so many kinds of chairs which come to your mind, depending upon the culture where you are listening to this word. Okay, so there could be chairs having three legs, there could be chairs which look like a couch, right? So on and so forth. So once we understand, this primary notion, uh, and its foundation, as I told you, is in the theory of language. So this is the theory of language, right? Only that the Sashio are good, that all language is a science system, right? So all kind of language that we speak for day-to-day communication, uh, you know, uh, in order to describe foods, in order to describe any scientific phenomenon, in order to describe places, in order to describe human interactions, in order to describe road system, whatever. All language is collection of signs, right? So these are essentially signs which make it possible for us to communicate with each other, right? However, there are some later, developments in understanding of the notion of sign. So one development comes from Charles Sanders Peirce, and the development is this, that signs could be divided into three categories, right? Iconic, indexical, and symbolic, right? And based upon that, we also use kind of bring to our mind another distinction between various kinds of signs, and that distinction is uh, you know some signs are abstract and some signs are visual, right? So speaking a word baby and listen to that is different from looking at the picture of a baby, right? So when you look at the picture of the baby, probably there is nothing else that comes to your mind as far as that particular picture is concerned. If anything else comes to your mind by looking at the picture of a baby, then that something else is another signified of the picture of baby, right? But in addition to, another signified, you have a picture in front of you. So you see that sign in such a manner that the signified of the picture of baby is inside it as well. So if it is a visual representation of a baby, right, a painting of a baby or picture of a baby or an image of a baby is different from the word baby, right? So the word baby has more potential to have greater number of signifieds as compared to the painting or picture of a baby. However, still the picture or painting of the baby as a sign can have more than one signifieds, right? So at this juncture, at this particular juncture, we are moving to the theory of the visual, right? So we are going beyond the Saussures philosophy, right? And we are going to start discussing just the visual sign, right? So even if we are focusing on visual sign, there is greater probability in that for us to stick to a stable signified for that particular sign. Because if you see picture of a baby, for example, if it's now suppose it is picture of any one of us, right? We look at the picture, we know this is who that person is, right? We know this is who that person is, right? So the connection between signifier and signified seems to be so stable when we are looking at a visual and not at the word, right? But Charles Sanders Peirce, you can see the name, on the screen highlighted in green. He came up with this uh, theory of visual signs as well, and he argued that actually there is no fixed signified even for the visual signs. Even the visual signs have tendency to produce various kinds of signifieds, right? So he came up with the idea of, an iconic sign, an indexical sign, and a symbolic sign. So these are three kinds of signs. So when we look at a sign, we should be able to identify what kind of sign that particular sign is. So iconic sign, he would argue, the signifier represents the signified by apparently having a likeness to it. For example, a photograph, right? So photograph of a baby is a sign, right? So it is called iconic sign. Diagrams also are iconic signs. Diagrams, for example, the ones which are used in architecture, in various sciences, biology or physics or such other subjects, they are all iconic signs. They are kind of true representation of, something real. On the other hand, there are some indexical signs. They are inherent in a particular culture. Example is a baby soother, which is used in some parts of the world to indicate those kind of, public places where there are baby changing facilities, right? Now, you can very clearly compare this kind of sign, which is called indexical sign, with the iconic one, right? So in iconic, you see a picture and you say, okay, this is picture of that person. It is over. But in case of in an indexical sign, you see a picture, for example, picture of a baby soother, but that does not mean a baby soother. Rather, that means that this place is equipped with baby changing facility, right? Now, this kind of connection between a sign and uh, between a signifier and its signified, this kind of connection is culturally specific, right? So you will not interpret an indexical sign to mean a baby changing facilities everywhere in the world. It really depends on the local culture of that particular place, right? Uh, at other places, you will find uh, you will find an image. You will find image of a family to indicate the baby changing facilities. So you will, for example, if we are talking about, the restrooms, right? So uh, you know so a male figure will indicate, of course, the restroom specific for male. The female, figure will indicate the restrooms for female. But in a family figure, for example, a male, female, and a baby together, right? Three of them together in one image, that will indicate that this place is equipped with baby changing facility, right? So that is a different, in this case, there is a different sign in order to indicate baby changing facilities, right? But as I said earlier, and as our philosopher has discussed that these are indexical signs and their meaning is inherent to that particular culture. They are culturally specific, right? And lastly, then there are the signs uh, which are symbolic, right? So symbolic signs are clearly the ones which indicate something other than what is being shown, right? So one example of that would be a tennis player, right, playing a game, right? And while the tennis player is playing game in the in a particular image, the tennis player is wearing a watch, right? And the image has been captured in such a manner that we are able to look at the watch, right? Now, uh, what the creator of that image has done is the creator of that image has established a connection between the watch and the tennis player. The tennis player is a kind of, you know, uh, a celebrity, right? Is a known figure, and therefore, uh, uh, you know, uh, is a figure of success, right? Now, that kind of individual wearing a watch of a particular brand, right, seems to be symbolically indicating that if the viewer, wear the same watch, you might be able to become a celebrity of that status, or you might be able to have success as that individual is, right? So this kind of meaning of a particular image is called a symbolic meaning, right? Or this kind of image is called symbolic. So the person or the individual who creates that kind of image already knows what meaning they want that image to produce for the consumers, right? So the most common example of the symbolic images is the advertisements, right? And by the way, advertisements are one of the most primary subjects of analysis in visual methodologies. There is another possibility when we look at a sign. So now these are three, of course, major kind of signs that we analyze. And when we are, analyzing signs, we are supposed to identify what kind of sign is. But this kind of theoretical background does not require you to interpret every sign as iconic or indexical or symbolic, right? But just to kind of give you a little more tangible idea, the symbolic as students of literature, we interpret or discuss or analyze various uh, signs or various images as symbolic, right? And when we discuss them as symbolic, we also sometimes look for what we call an anchorage, right? So anchorage could be a statement or a text that accompanies a particular text, or that accompanies a particular image, right? So we might have an advertisement, or we might have an image in general. In either case, we might find a text along with that, a sentence, a caption, a statement, which helps us to explain or interpret or discuss that particular text from a certain perspective. So those texts which accompany a particular advertisement or an image They help us to anchor our analysis into a particular idea, right? So, there is example of Ronald Barthes, for example. You can see his name over here. He is one of the major, theorists of, uh, modern literary theory, right? So he argued with reference to, so he see basically his focus was French culture, right? So in French culture, he uh, he identifies quite a range of images which are used, and then he interprets using semiological approach, right? So one example, famous example that he gives is that of detergent, right? So his idea is that the so he would analyze one of the common advertisements in France. Of course, these advertisements are very common everywhere in the world, and the advertisement is this, that we are made to see the function of a detergent in such a manner that detergent uh, you know removes dirt from cloth, right? And as we watch more and more of it, we seem to understand the idea that we we are using detergent, a kind of powder or a kind of liquid, in order to uh, wash our clothing of uh, all the dirt which is in it, right? So he will come up with a number of interpretations of this kind of advertisement. So the first primary interpretation he comes up with is that we are made to see symbolically that detergent has the potential to wash the clothes of its dirt. Or in other words, detergent has the quality to extract dirt from a piece of cloth. Now, he would argue that this is a very cultural specific meaning which is being assigned to detergent. He would argue that detergent does not in fact does not extract dirt from cloth. Rather, detergent has potential to destroy the components of dirt, right? And thereby, while detergent destroys the components of dirt, in that process, uh, the cloth appears to get clean. So his argument is that actually cloth does not become clean, or the dirt does not come out of it because of detergent. The dirt comes out of piece of cloth because of the water that we use in the process. Detergent function is different, right? It is to reduce the size of the molecule. So therefore, the creator of that advertisement is creating a myth, creating a lie, which is not scientifically sound. But that is being repeated so many times that we tend to believe in that as it is. He would further argue that when we look at this kind of advertisement, basically there is an inherent competition which we are not made aware of, and that competition is against the classical soap, right? So the detergent is shown to us as extracting dirt out of cloth, but it is not just but there is nothing different that detergent is doing. The function of detergent is exactly same as detergent of soap, but because soap is a older technology. Therefore, these detergent brands, they are trying to outdo, or they are trying to kind of minimize the relevance or effectiveness of soap, right? But we are not made aware of you know uh, this particular competition that the detergent brands have against the soap, right? So detergent therefore is portrayed as having two functions. Number one, it extracts dirt, which Bath says is wrong. It does not extract dirt. It's water that does that, right? Number two, detergent is portrayed as uh, the only kind of chemical which can clean our clothes, right? Which also is wrong because soaps can do the same function, right? But according to Bath, an image is portrayed in such a manner over and over, and we are exposed to it so repeatedly that eventually we start taking as that as the only truth, right? Now, the language that goes with it, with an image, uh, that kind of becomes anchorage or foundation for our analysis, right? So this is an example of the detergent advertisement. So you watch the advertisement itself, you might not reach the same conclusion just by watching uh, clothes being washed, maybe in a laundry machine, right? Even if you see the detergent going into it, right? You might not extract the same meaning. You might not get the same meaning out of it. Therefore, either you will hear somebody speaking, or you will see written, you know, along with the advertisement on the screen that this uh, brand, so and so, Excel or Super or whatever brand of the detergent is cleansing the dirt from cloth, right? Uh, so this text that accompanies the image, you know, directs our mind or directs our understanding, kind of controls our understanding to analyze the image only in one particular way, right? So Bars was, he was a kind of culture critic. So the last meaning and another meaning that he assigned to this advertisement was that the idea of dirt is being necessarily reduced to something unacceptable in the society. That, according to him, is problematic at another end, because it is as if there is some evil over here, which is being removed from the cloth. So so culturally speaking, uh, the advertisement is creating an essential distance between the nature and the human, right? So the dirt, as it comes from the wild nature, right? So there is a deliberate effort to create that distance so that people should start liking a dirt less, right? A dirt less life. So which actually is not possible because you will have to withdraw human beings from the nature in order to do that, right? So you might have seen that now more, the advertisement uh, about the Excel detergent, and they would say that instead of making the kids hate the dirt and the soil and the muddy water and all that, they will make the kids play, right, in the mud and in the muddy water and uh, in the soil and all that. But then here will come Excel detergent, right? with its power to wash off all the dirt once again, right? So that advertisement is kind of playing with the idea that we are not trying to withdraw the kids from their from their childhood enjoyment in the common wild nature. Rather, let kids continue to play with the dirt and with the muddy water, because that is where joy of the childhood lies. So let them play that, because we have this detergent to help the parents wash off the clothes, right? So these advertisements, they are the idea is that they are not neutral. They have very heavy cultural meaning attached to them, right? So when we do the compositional interpretation of an image, right, we do not reduce it just to uh, what is the structure of that particular image. Well, whether it is oil painting or it is watercolor or it is a photograph, or we do not just stick to that. Rather, we go to semiology, right? And this is an example of a semiological analysis of a text, right? Where you see the connection between signified, the signifier, and the signified, and the symbolic potential that signifier might have in that particular cultural context, right? And then we, as interpreters of that particular, um, image, we point out if there are any contradictions in the image, right? Or if there is any cultural or symbolic depth in that particular image, right? Which is in general ignored. And if you are able to point out that particular symbolic depth through the image. Okay, so moving on to discourse analysis. Okay, so in discourse analysis, the most important writer is Michel Foucault. I am sure some of you are aware of this writer. So he has written quite a number of books, but the most important one is the archaeology of knowledge when it comes to the method of discourse analysis, right? So he was concerned with the process of meaning making, on the basis of any particular visual or any particular idea, right? So let's read this, these couple of paragraphs from here about Foucault's idea of uh, his idea of discourse, right? And then from there we move on to the analysis based upon discursive understanding of any particular image or text. So Foucault was centrally concerned with how meaning is made, and the enormous recent impact of his work has led to rather general use of the notion of discourse across both the humanities and social sciences, which sometimes seem to refer to little more than meanings. Yet Foucault meant by discourse more by discourse than just a rather vague indication that knowledges were structured in particular ways. He specified and deployed the term discourse carefully, and he believed that its implications are rather different from those of semiology. In particular, sense of the productivity and diversity of discourses and how they are practiced in all sorts of everyday ways could lead to a much richer approach to visual images, more grounded in their context and in their audiencing. The fact that it has not so far produced much work that focuses on the latter concern is perhaps explained by that lingering hold of semiological analysis and its radically internal analysis of images and their meanings, as well as the grip of Elkin's primary scene on the practice of criticism. However that may be, Foucault took care to specify discourse quite carefully. Might be useful to remind ourselves of his discussion. Discourse refers to groups of statements that structure the way a thing is thought. and to the way we act on the basis of that thinking. All right. So this is different from semiology, right? So we discussed earlier that semiology is a study of science, and according to semiology, according to semiological approach, uh, a sign is understood because there is a signified attached to a signifier. That signified may not be stable, but there is a signified anyway, right? So because of the potential of signifiers to produce signifieds, that we understand language and we understand meaning, right? But Foucault comes up with a different idea, and the idea is that discourse is is group of statements that structure the way a thing is thought. So he was referring to a broader context in which we make sense of things or we make sense of ideas, right? And that broader context to which he refers, that broader context is called a discourse, right? So very simple example of a discourse, how it works is if I make a statement like 2 and 2 make 4, right? If I make a statement like 2 and 2 make 4, you know, this statement is understood by almost all of you, right? But if you think carefully, this statement is meaningful to you. What makes this statement meaningful to you is a particular kind of knowledge, a particular subject. Can you name that subject, anybody? Which particular subject makes this statement meaningful to you? 2 and 2 make 4.
Maths.
Sir,
Yes, very good.
maths.
So it is maths. I mean, answer is obvious, right? But we often don't think of that. We just make the statement because we have been studying maths for so long now that we have started taking the meaning of the statement for granted, right? But we do not necessarily, whenever we need to say that 2 and 2 make 4, we do not necessarily have to point out that you don't say, for example, mathematically speaking, 2 and 2 make 4, right? Because the statement 2 and 2 make 4 has become so common, and we are so much aware of the basics of mathematics at this time of history, right? It was not the case always. Like 3000 years or 4000 years ago, people might not make this statement as confidently as they make it today, right? So it is the discourse of mathematics, right, which makes this statement meaningful to all of us, right? So there are a lot many other examples as well. So we are all surrounded by discourses, right? So if you are not a law person, if you're not a law person and you are asked to read a judgment written by a legal expert, probably you will read a few sentences and then you might give up, saying that the language of this particular verdict is too complex for you. Why does that happen? Even if it is written, if even if it is written in a language that you are aware of. So if the verdict is written in Urdu, for example, right, and most of you are native Urdu speakers, still you might not be able to understand the content of that legal verdict. Why does that happen? It happens because we might not be aware of what we call legal discourse, right? So we are surrounded by lot many discourses all the time, and the meaning making activity, right, the meaning making activity that takes place among us, that meaning making activity takes place because of the discourses. That was Foucault's finding, right? And see how it is different from the semiological analysis that we discussed earlier, right? So there is no direct focus on the connection between signifier and signified in this case. Rather, in Foucault's case, all the language that we speak, it is governed by a particular one particular discourse or the other. And our minds or our understanding of a particular statement is subject to the discourse which is governing that kind of language. So there is a legal discourse, there is a political discourse, there is a philosophical discourse, right? There is a scientific discourse, right? So these are all discourses which surround us all the time. In order to understand meaning of a statement in a particular discourse, we need to be aware of the vocabulary of that particular discourse, right? So did anybody raise hand? Any question? Okay, if no, then I'll just go ahead. So in other words, discourse is a particular knowledge about the world that shapes how the world is understood and how things are done in it. So Linda Need defines discourse as a particular form of language with its own rules and conventions and the institutions within which the discourse is produced and circulated. And she suggests that art, for example, can also be understood as a discourse, right? As a specified form of knowledge. She says that the discourse of art in the 19th century consisted of the concatenation of visual images, the language and structures of criticism, culture institutions, publics for art, and the values and knowledge is made possible within and through high culture. Discourse also produces subjects such as artists, critics, curators. On this understanding, art becomes not certain kind of visual images, but the knowledges, institutions, subjects, and practices that work to define certain images as art and others as not art. So let's read these next two paragraphs, and I think then that will be enough for today. So discourses are articulated through all sorts of visual and verbal images and texts, and also through the practices that those languages permit. The diversity of forms through which a discourse can be articulated means that intertextuality is important to the understanding of discourse. So intertextuality refers to the way one text or image, the way that the meaning of any one discursive image or text depend not only on that one text or image, but also on the meanings carried by other images and texts. Hence again, the importance of written text for visual images. One example of intertextuality is the catalog essays that accompany art exhibitions and that are read by visitors to that exhibition to make sense of the images, right? So when we are in the field of discourse analysis, and if we are using discourse analysis as a method, right, then we pay equal attention to the image and the text that accompanies it, right? And when we do that, we are engaged in another kind of way of interpreting text, and that way is called intertextuality. It is called intertextuality because this approach engages with two different texts simultaneously, a written text and a visual image. So Foucault was quite clear that discourse was a form of discipline, right? So please pay attention to the response that some of you made to my question when I said, which particular subject makes you think or makes you understand the statement 2 and 2 make 4, right? So a few of you said math, and I hope everybody else agrees to that, right? Now, I'm sure at the same time you all understand that another word that we use for a subject is discipline, right? You might have heard this word being used, discipline. So you say that there is a discipline of mathematics, there is a discipline of chemistry, there is a discipline of social sciences, physics, or so on and so forth, right? So essentially that, that kind of subject or discipline is what makes which helps us understand what statements mean. So Foucault was quite clear that discourse was a form of discipline. This leads us to his concern with power. Discourse, he maintained, is powerful, but it is powerful in a particular way is powerful because it is productive, right? It is product in, I hope you understand the word, the meaning of power and productive over here, right? Now, listen, when you understand the meaning of the word, of the statement, two and two make four, right? When you understand the meaning of that statement because of a certain discourse, which is mathematics, right? Then mind it that you are subjecting your mind or your thinking process to a particular discipline. In other words, you are subjecting your understanding of this statement to the power of a particular discipline. That is the power that disciplines hold, right? Who create disciplines? That is a separate discussion. Now, what do we mean by productive over here? It is productive because it makes meaning possible, right? The discourse is powerful but productive. It is productive because it makes meanings possible. So discourse discipline subjects into certain ways of thinking and acting, right? So discourse in a way is controlling your thought process, right? I hope you understand that discourses are controlling your thought process because you are agreeing to understand this statement, two and two make four, in a particular way. You are all agreeing to that. Don't have to, but you do, right? That means the discourse controls your mind to think about a particular statement in a particular way. So discourse discipline subjects, so you are subjects, we are all subjects, into certain ways of thinking and acting. But this is not simply repressive. It does not impose rules for thought and behavior on a pre-existing human agent. Instead, human subjects are produced through discourses. So our sense of ourself is made through the operation of discourse. So too are objects, relations, places, scenes. Discourse produces the world as it understands it. So an important implication of Foucault's account of power is that power is not something imposed from the top of society down onto its oppressed bottom layers. Power is everywhere since discourse too is everywhere. And there are many discourses, some of which already contest the terms of others. Foucault claimed that where there is power, there is a resistance, a multiplicity of points of resistance. And by this he meant that there are many discourses that jostle and compete in their effects. But certain discourses are nonetheless dominant, and Foucault was particularly concerned in his own work with the emergence of institutions and technologies that were structured to specific, even if complex and contested discourses. And he suggested that the dominance of certain discourses occurred not only because they were located in socially powerful institutions, those given coercive powers by state, for example, such as the police, prisons, and workhouses, but also because their discourses claimed absolute truth. So the construction of claims to truth lies at the heart of intersection of power and knowledge. Foucault insisted that knowledge and power are imbricated one in the other, not only because all knowledge is discursive and all discourse is saturated with power, but because the most powerful discourses in terms of productiveness of their social effects depend on assumption and claims that their knowledge is true. This particular the particular grounds on which truth is claimed, and these shifts historically constitute what Foucault called a regime of truth, right? So you might notice over here right away that how discourses work, right? So so we have a discourse which is produced and propagated by the state, by virtue of which the state says that if a person acts in so and so way, then that person is liable to be arrested by the police, right? So the state always has a discourse which, according to the state, is always truth and has to be agreed upon by everybody who lives in a particular state, right? Anyways, now concluding this, we can use art, sometimes to point out, or, or we can interpret art, or we can interpret various visuals in order to point out how power works through discourse, or in order to resist the power which is offered by a discourse. Right? So any questions, please ask them in the next class. It's time to end the class. So we'll start